The wind raced across the frozen fields like a living thing, weaving through the gnarled trees and stirring the old, dying grass beneath the snow. Above, a heavy gray sky loomed, threatening more storms. The northern wilderness lay silent, endless, and cold. In the heart of that cold, a lone figure moved. Arden the silver wolf made his way through the snow, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. His fur, once brilliant and full, had grown thin and patchy, marked by years of battles and harsh winters. Each step he took left a faint imprint on the soft crust of snow, and each breath steamed in the freezing air. He was alone. Once, Arden had led a proud pack, brothers and sisters who had laughed and hunted under the endless sky. But time had been cruel. Starvation had come first, then disease, and finally the hunters, with their guns and traps. One by one, his family had fallen. Now, only Arden remained, a fading legend in a land that had little room left for legends. Still, he pressed on, guided by an instinct older than memory. Tonight, hunger gnawed at him more fiercely than ever. His ribs jutted against his skin, his paws burned with every step. Yet deeper than hunger was something more dangerous: loneliness. As Arden climbed a low hill, the world unfolded before him, a stretch of woods giving way to a human village, small and hunched against the cold. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Lights flickered in windows. Laughter echoed faintly through the night. Arden stood there for a long moment, nose lifted to the wind. The scent of roasting meat reached him, rich and sharp, a painful reminder of what he had lost. He knew humans meant danger. He bore the scars of their bullets and traps. Yet tonight, the emptiness inside him outweighed fear. Slowly, cautiously, he moved toward the village. In one of the cottages at the edge of the village, a boy watched the world from behind a frost-streaked window. Evan. He was 12 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that fell into his thoughtful eyes. Since his sister Elsie had died 2 winters ago, Evan had spent most of his time alone, wandering the woods, drawing pictures in the snow, listening to the wind. He found comfort in the quiet places where most people only felt fear. Tonight, as he gazed into the swirling night, his breath misting against the cold glass, something unusual caught his eye. A figure, silver and silent, slipping through the snow like a dream. A wolf. Evan's heart leapt. His mind raced with the old stories his grandfather used to tell, tales of the silver ghost, a majestic wolf, the last of his kind, roaming the world with sorrow in his heart but strength in his bones. The villagers whispered about the silver wolf like he was a myth. Some said seeing him brought good luck. Others said it meant death. Evan didn't know what to believe. All he knew was that he wasn't afraid. He grabbed his coat from the peg near the door, tucked a piece of bread into his pocket, and slipped outside without making a sound. The night swallowed him instantly. The cold bit at his skin, but he didn't falter. He moved slowly, carefully, toward the figure at the edge of the trees. Arden smelled the boy before he saw him, a clean, human scent, mingled with wool and earth. His muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at him to run. But something made him stay. The boy emerged from the shadows, small and vulnerable, holding out his hands to show he meant no harm. In one hand, he carried a scrap of bread. In the other, a thick, worn blanket. He knelt in the snow, setting both items down carefully before backing away. Arden watched him with wary golden eyes. The boy's heart pounded so loudly that even over the wind, the wolf could hear it. Yet the boy's hands did not tremble. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "I know you're cold," Evan said. "And hungry." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, slowly, Arden stepped forward. Every fiber of his body ached with caution. Every step felt like it might be a mistake. But he could smell no threat in the boy, only kindness, the rarest scent of all. He lowered his head and sniffed at the bread. It was stale, but to a starving wolf, it smelled like life itself. Gently, he picked it up between his teeth and swallowed it whole. Then he looked at the blanket. A part of him, the wild part, recoiled. Wolves did not need the gifts of humans. They were proud creatures, bound to the laws of fang and frost. But another part, the part worn thin by years of loss, longed for the warmth the blanket offered. Carefully, Arden lowered himself onto the snow beside it, curling his body as close to the fabric as he dared. The boy smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up his pale face. "Good," Evan whispered. "You're not just a story." He stood there for a moment longer, as if he wished to say more, but the cold pressed in, and the voices of his parents calling from the house reminded him he couldn't stay. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised. Then he turned and ran back toward the cottage, the snow swallowing the sound of his footsteps. Arden watched him go. Above, the first stars blinked to life in the deepening sky. The next morning, Evan awoke before the first light touched the snow-covered village. The boy dressed hurriedly, wrapping himself in layers of wool before slipping outside. In his hands, he carried a basket filled with scraps of meat, hidden carefully under a cloth. The village was still asleep, the world silent except for the crunch of his boots against the frost. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with a strange, fierce hope. At the edge of the woods, where he had left the wolf, he paused. There he was. Arden lay curled in the same place, a dusting of snow over his silver fur. His golden eyes opened as Evan approached, wary but no longer hostile. The bond between them, fragile and tentative, had not been broken overnight. Slowly, Evan knelt and placed the basket in the snow. He opened it, letting the smell of food fill the air. The wolf lifted his head, nostrils flaring. "It's okay," Evan whispered. "It's for you." Hesitating only a moment, Arden moved closer and pulled a strip of meat from the basket. He chewed slowly, never taking his eyes off the boy. The cold nipped at Evan's cheeks, but he stayed still, careful not to make any sudden movements. His heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. Over the next hour, they sat together, the line between boy and beast blurring with every passing minute. Evan spoke softly, telling the wolf about his sister, about the loneliness that had crept into his life after she was gone. "I think maybe you know what that's like," Evan said. The wolf, as if understanding, placed his head lightly on the edge of the blanket Evan had brought. It was the smallest gesture, but to Evan, it meant everything. When the sun finally rose, casting a golden light over the snow, Evan knew he had to go. His parents would be waking soon. But before he left, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed his fingers against Arden's fur. It was softer than he had imagined, thick and warm despite the harsh winter. "I'll come back," he promised. As Evan disappeared into the trees, Arden watched him go, not with suspicion, but with something close to trust. In the frozen wilderness, a new pact had been formed, unspoken, unbreakable. A pact written in snow, blood, and the quiet spaces between heartbeats. The days passed, each one slipping by with the quiet rhythm of the wilderness. Evan returned every day to the edge of the forest, where he and the silver wolf had formed an unspoken bond. It was a secret shared only between the two of them, a bond forged in silence, not words. Arden, the silver wolf, had begun to trust Evan. It wasn't much, but it was something. He would wait for the boy each morning, his silver fur gleaming like a shadow in the snow. Sometimes he would allow Evan to get closer, to touch him, but always with caution. The wolf was wild, and wild creatures could not be tamed by kindness alone. But there was something in the air, a mutual understanding, that had begun to form between them. The villagers, on the other hand, spoke in hushed tones about the boy's strange behavior. Whispers floated through the streets, rumors of a wild creature living in the woods, of a wolf so rare it seemed to be a creature of legend. Some said Evan was being foolish. Others worried he was putting himself in danger. But Evan never paid them any mind. He had found something far more important than the fear and suspicion of others: a friend, a companion, a creature who understood the deep loneliness that had taken root inside him after Elsie's death. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Evan stood at the edge of the forest once more, watching the trees sway in the wind. He felt the familiar stirring in his chest, the same pull that had led him to the wolf again and again. It wasn't just the desire to help the wolf. It was something more. A sense of belonging, as if in the presence of Arden, he was no longer alone in the world. He had brought something new this time, a thick piece of cloth, embroidered with bright, colorful patterns. His mother had sewn it for him, but Evan had no use for it. He thought it might make a good blanket for the wolf. As he approached the clearing, he spotted Arden's silver coat glistening in the fading light. The wolf was standing in the snow, looking off into the distance, his eyes reflecting the last rays of the sun. Evan slowed his steps, not wanting to startle him. He knelt down on the cold ground, carefully unrolling the cloth before him. The wind picked up, sending tiny flakes of snow swirling through the air. He watched the wolf carefully, wondering if this would be the day when Arden finally allowed him to get closer. To his surprise, the wolf moved toward him, not with the caution he had shown before, but with purpose. Arden walked across the snow, his steps soundless as if he were part of the land itself. Evan's heart skipped a beat. He held his breath as the wolf lowered himself next to the blanket. Arden's golden eyes met his, and for a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the steady beat of Evan's heart. The boy held out a hand, trembling slightly. "It's for you," he whispered. Arden sniffed the cloth, his nose brushing gently against it. The wolf didn't back away. Instead, he lay down beside the blanket, curling up in a way that seemed almost like an invitation. Evan could hardly believe it. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks, and now that it had come, he didn't know how to respond. Tentatively, he reached out and placed his hand on the wolf's back. The fur was soft and warm, far warmer than he expected. Arden didn't move, didn't flinch. For the first time, the two of them were no longer separated by the barriers of fear, of instinct, or of human understanding. In this moment, they were simply two beings, connected by something invisible, something primal. Evan's fingers brushed through Arden's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of the wolf's chest as he breathed deeply. The boy smiled, a feeling of peace washing over him. He had never felt this close to anyone, not since Elsie had died. The loss of his sister had left an empty space in his heart, but now, as he sat next to Arden, that space was starting to heal. For a long while, they sat in silence. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in a blanket of white, and the sky above began to turn deep shades of purple and orange as the sun set completely. The cold bit at their skin, but neither moved. Neither spoke. Eventually, Evan pulled the cloth tighter around himself and the wolf, as though they were sharing a secret no one else could understand. The wind howled in the distance, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a lullaby. "You're not alone anymore," Evan whispered softly, though he wasn't sure if Arden could understand him. But the wolf's steady breathing was all the answer he needed. That night, Evan stayed by Arden's side longer than usual. His parents were already asleep when he slipped back into the house, careful not to wake them. His mother would ask where he had been, but Evan would say nothing. He didn't need to explain. She wouldn't understand. No one would. But Evan understood. He understood that sometimes, the greatest bonds are formed in the quiet moments, in the shared silences between a boy and a wolf. As he lay in bed, the night stretching endlessly before him, Evan knew something had changed. A deep connection had been made. The bond between them had become something more than friendship. It was a pact not just between a boy and a wolf, but between two lost souls who had found each other in the vast, unending wilderness. The days following Evan's silent pact with Arden felt both timeless and fleeting. As the winter deepened, so did the connection between the boy and the wolf. With each passing day, they met at the edge of the forest, their bond growing in the quiet stillness of the snow-covered world. Evan continued to bring food, but it was no longer just the scraps from his table. He had begun hunting in the woods, learning the art of tracking, of finding game. He wasn't just feeding the wolf anymore. He was becoming part of this ancient world of the wild. The villagers had stopped talking about the strange boy who wandered into the woods, and Evan was thankful for that. His days were simple now. He worked the fields, helped his mother with the household chores, and then, when the shadows grew long, he would slip away to the forest. The world beyond the woods seemed distant, as though nothing existed outside the ever-present whiteness of the snow. But there was something in the air, something that Evan couldn't quite place. It wasn't the cold, it was sharper than that, a heaviness that seemed to settle over the land, thick and ominous. The sky had darkened over the past few days, the clouds hanging low like a heavy cloak, ready to fall at any moment. The wind had shifted, too, no longer a gentle breeze but a restless, mournful howl that seemed to carry whispers of a storm on the horizon. Evan had learned to read the signs of the wilderness, but there was something different about this storm. It wasn't just the weather, it was the sense that something was coming, something that would change everything. One afternoon, as he arrived at the usual meeting place, Evan noticed that Arden was not waiting for him in the clearing. The wolf had been there every day without fail, but today the forest was silent. Not a single paw print marked the snow in the clearing. Evan's heart skipped a beat as he scanned the woods, his breath quickening in the cold air. "Arden," he called softly, his voice barely a whisper. Nothing. He pushed through the trees, his eyes darting to every shadow. The wind seemed to pick up, swirling around him in erratic gusts. The sky was darkening rapidly, and the first flakes of snow began to fall, swirling in the wind like icy confetti. He had only gone a few steps into the woods when he heard a low, mournful howl. Evan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came from deep within the forest, from the direction of the mountain pass that led to the old hunting grounds. It was a call, a cry for help, and Evan knew immediately that it was Arden. Without thinking, Evan sprinted toward the sound, his boots crunching loudly in the snow. He had learned enough of the woods to know that no one could survive the mountain pass during a storm unless they were well prepared. And Arden, despite being a wild wolf, wasn't prepared. He was injured, or worse. The wind howled louder, biting at his face as he ran. The snow was coming down thick now, blurring his vision. But Evan didn't stop. His mind was focused entirely on one thought: Arden needed him. As he neared the mountain pass, the air grew colder, the wind fiercer. The trees here were thicker, their branches twisted and gnarled, like the fingers of ancient spirits reaching toward the sky. The storm was growing stronger with every step, and Evan could feel the pressure in his chest, a weight that threatened to crush him. He had to find the wolf. He called out again, his voice lost to the wind. "Arden." His breath misted in the frigid air, but there was no answer. Only the howling of the storm. Then, suddenly, he saw a shadow moving through the trees. A flash of silver in the snow. Arden. But the wolf was not running toward him. Instead, he was limping, his body hunched low to the ground as if he were struggling to stay upright. His fur was matted with snow, and blood streaked across his side, staining the pristine white of the snow red. Evan's heart clenched as he rushed forward. "Arden," he shouted again, this time louder, more desperate. The wolf's golden eyes met his, and for a brief moment, there was recognition and fear. Arden's muscles trembled, his head drooping as if he could no longer keep going. Evan reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the wolf's fur. Arden flinched, but did not pull away. His side heaved with each breath, the blood still trickling down his fur. "Hang on," Evan whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "We'll get you through this." But there was no time. The storm was growing stronger, the wind turning violent, swirling around them like a beast. The mountain pass was treacherous even in calm weather, and with the storm intensifying, it was a place where no one could survive. Evan gritted his teeth and knelt beside the wolf. He had no choice. He couldn't leave Arden out here in the storm. With one arm, he carefully lifted the wolf, supporting his weight. Arden's body sagged against him, and for a brief moment, Evan wondered if he was too late. But then, the wolf's golden eyes flickered open, and he gave a soft whine. "Stay with me," Evan muttered. "We'll make it through this." Together, they moved slowly, with Evan guiding the injured wolf back toward the village. The storm raged around them, but the boy's resolve did not falter. The bond between him and Arden had been forged in the depths of silence and trust, and now it would be tested. Through the blinding snow and the howling winds, Evan and the silver wolf made their way toward the village, but the storm wasn't just the weather. It was something far greater, something older than either of them. As they approached the edge of the forest, Evan's mind raced. What had caused this injury? Who, or what, had attacked Arden? The answers felt as elusive as the storm itself, but one thing was clear: the bond they shared had only just begun to be tested. And the storm was only beginning. Evan's breath came in ragged gasps as he supported the injured wolf, his body growing colder with each passing step. The storm raged around them, snow stinging his face and blurring his vision. He was certain he couldn't keep going much longer, yet he refused to stop. Every step was a struggle, his legs aching from the cold and the weight of the wolf pressed against him. But Arden needed him, and that was enough to drive him forward. The village was close. He could see the faint outlines of rooftops in the distance, barely visible through the swirling storm. The lights were dim, like stars lost in a night of snow. But the path to the village was treacherous, and Evan had no time to waste. Arden's injury was worsening with every moment, and if they didn't make it to shelter soon, there was a real chance the wolf would die in the storm. Evan's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't lose Arden, not after everything they had shared. The wolf had been his only true companion in the wilderness, the only one who had understood his pain. They had shared their grief and their loneliness, their silence more profound than any words. As they neared the outskirts of the village, Evan's mind raced. He couldn't bring Arden into the village itself. The villagers would panic. They would think he was mad, or worse, they might try to hurt the wolf. The villagers didn't understand. They saw Arden as a threat, a wild beast, but to Evan, he was a friend, a brother, a guardian. He had to find somewhere safe, somewhere hidden where Arden could heal in peace. Evan turned away from the village, his eyes scanning the snow-covered landscape for a place to shelter. He spotted a small cabin in the distance, tucked away between two large pine trees. It was isolated, the perfect place for them to rest and wait out the storm. The cabin was old, abandoned long ago by its owners, but it would serve as a refuge now. With what little strength he had left, Evan guided Arden toward the cabin, their progress slow but steady. The wind howled louder as they reached the door, and Evan struggled to open it, the handle frozen shut. But desperation fueled him, and with a final, determined push, he forced the door open just enough to slip inside. The cabin was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the dying fire in the hearth. It smelled of dust and wood, the air heavy with the scent of the storm that had followed them inside. Evan quickly dragged the wolf inside, closing the door behind them with a sigh of relief. The warmth of the cabin felt like a balm to his frozen skin, but it was no match for the cold that had settled deep inside him. He carefully laid Arden down on the floor, the wolf's golden eyes still open, though his breathing was labored. Evan knelt beside him, placing his hand on the wolf's side. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if the wolf could hear him. The storm outside howled, but in the cabin, it was quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the ragged breaths of the injured wolf. Evan looked around the cabin, his mind racing. He needed to help Arden, but he had no medical knowledge. He didn't know how to treat a wolf's wounds, especially not in the middle of a storm. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized how little he truly knew. He had hoped that simply bringing Arden to safety would be enough, but now he saw that it wasn't. He rummaged through the cabin, finding only old blankets, some dried herbs, and a few empty crates. He didn't have what he needed, but he couldn't give up. He couldn't let Arden die. Taking a deep breath, Evan began to tear the blankets into strips, doing his best to fashion a makeshift bandage. He gently wrapped it around the wolf's side, trying to stop the bleeding, but Arden flinched with every touch. His body was too weak, and his eyes were filled with an exhaustion that made Evan's heart ache. "Please don't leave me," Evan whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, Arden. I don't know what I'll do without you." For a moment, there was silence, and Evan feared he had lost the wolf. But then, as if in answer, Arden lifted his head slightly, his golden eyes locking onto Evan's. There was a softness in those eyes, a recognition that made Evan's chest tighten. The wolf was still with him, still fighting. Evan swallowed hard, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. He couldn't let himself break down now. Arden needed him to be strong. He sat down beside the wolf, his back against the cold stone wall. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cabin, it was peaceful, save for the occasional crackling of the fire. Slowly, Evan drifted into a light sleep, his head resting on the rough wooden floor. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and the fire in the hearth began to die. The warmth had faded, but Evan didn't care. He was awake now, watching over the wolf. Arden's breathing was slower now, steadier, though still labored. Evan stood, stretching his legs, and walked over to the hearth, adding more wood to the fire. The light flickered back to life, casting shadows across the cabin. He glanced over at the wolf, his heart heavy. Arden was still with him, still alive, but Evan knew the worst was yet to come. The storm was not just outside. It was closing in on them, too. The weather was only the beginning. Something far darker, far more dangerous, was looming on the horizon. Evan could feel it in his bones. The danger wasn't just the storm, or the wilderness. The world was changing, and with it, the very nature of the bond he shared with the silver wolf. The wolf's pain had not been caused by a mere accident. Evan had no proof, but he knew in his gut that there was something more. Something unnatural had driven Arden to the point of injury, and it wasn't just the storm that they had to fear. Evan couldn't explain it, but he felt it deep in his soul. The storm was a warning. The real danger was yet to come. The night was still, the wind having finally begun to die down. Inside the small cabin, the fire had rekindled itself, crackling softly in the hearth. But the calmness was deceptive. Evan could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't lift. It wasn't the storm that troubled him now, it was something deeper, something older. The very air seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, a sensation that set every hair on his body standing on end. Evan sat by the fire, staring into its flickering flames. Arden lay beside him, the wolf's golden eyes closed in exhaustion, his breathing still uneven but no longer as desperate as before. The bleeding had slowed, but it had not stopped. Evan's hands were raw from trying to stop it, but he had no proper bandages, no herbs or salves to help. It was all he could do to keep the wound clean, to keep the wolf as comfortable as possible. The wind had stopped howling outside, but the world felt far too quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of waiting. Evan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something that wasn't the storm. As if on cue, the silence was broken by a low growl. Evan's heart leapt into his throat, and he turned sharply to face Arden. The wolf's eyes were wide now, filled with a sudden, primal alertness. His ears were flat against his skull, and his body was tense, every muscle coiled as if ready to spring into action. Evan swallowed hard. "Arden," he called softly, but the wolf didn't respond. He was too focused, too aware of something outside the cabin. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly. Evan glanced over at the window, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the faintest shadows moving outside, barely visible in the moonlight. They were too large to be mere trees swaying in the wind, too coordinated to be the wind itself. Without thinking, Evan rushed to the door, his pulse quickening. The snow outside was still falling, but it was the shadows that disturbed him. The shapes didn't belong in the forest, not at this hour. He carefully cracked the door open, his breath fogging up the cool air. For a brief moment, the storm seemed to retreat, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Evan peered into the darkness, his eyes straining to make out any shape in the snow. Then he saw them. A pair of glowing yellow eyes, just beyond the reach of the light. They shone like twin moons in the distance, watching him, watching the cabin. And in that instant, Evan knew that whatever was out there wasn't just watching, it was waiting. He slammed the door shut and turned back to Arden. The wolf's head was raised now, his body on alert. He was staring directly at Evan, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "They're here," Evan whispered, his voice barely audible. The wolf didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The tension in the air was unmistakable. Something or someone had come for them. Evan moved to the window, peering through a crack in the wooden shutters. The shadows outside had grown closer, but still, no sound came from them. Only the faintest rustling, like the shifting of trees, but there were no branches moving. The shadows were moving on their own. Evan's heart raced. He had no idea what was out there, but he could feel the danger closing in. Whatever these creatures were, they were not natural. The very way they moved, the way they watched, it was something primal, something ancient. He glanced down at Arden, who was still watching him intently, his golden eyes now filled with something deeper, a recognition, a warning. Evan's mind raced. He couldn't just hide. If they stayed here, they would be trapped. And if these creatures meant harm, the wolf wouldn't be able to defend them both in his current state. Arden was still too weak. "We have to move," Evan said, more to himself than to the wolf. But Arden's response was immediate. With a growl that echoed in the silence, the wolf staggered to his feet, his body swaying from the injury, but his eyes were sharp, focused, and full of determination. Evan's pulse quickened. Arden wasn't ready for this. He was still too weak to fight. "Wait," Evan said, but Arden ignored him, pushing toward the door. The wolf's body moved with a grace that defied his injury, his muscles rippling as he stood tall, an embodiment of raw power despite his wounds. Evan's hands trembled as he reached for his coat, pulling it on in haste. The urgency in the air was suffocating. Arden had always been a symbol of strength and freedom, but Evan had never seen him this desperate, this on edge. Whatever was coming, Arden knew more than Evan did, and he had no intention of hiding from it. Evan opened the door just a crack again, and this time the shadows were closer, just outside the cabin, moving silently through the trees. He could hear them now, faint footfalls in the snow, the sound of paws scraping against the frozen ground. There were at least 3, maybe more. His heart pounded in his chest. The figures were moving with purpose, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. They were wolves, but not like any wolves Evan had seen before. Their fur was dark, almost black, and their eyes glowed with a sinister light, the yellow piercing the darkness like a warning. Evan's blood ran cold. These weren't ordinary wolves. These were predators of a different kind. And they weren't here for Arden. As if sensing Evan's fear, Arden growled low, stepping forward toward the door, his body trembling with both strength and pain. "No, Arden, we have to stay hidden," Evan pleaded, but the wolf was not listening. He was already pushing forward, determined to face whatever threat had arrived. The wind began to pick up again, swirling around the cabin, howling with a fury that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. The storm was returning, but it wasn't just the storm that Evan had to worry about now. The wolves were here, and they had come for Arden. Evan's hands shook as he closed the door softly but firmly behind him. His mind raced for a plan, but it felt like the cold had frozen his very thoughts. Arden stood beside him, the silver fur along his spine bristling, his body trembling with a mixture of weakness and primal fury. Outside, the dark wolves gathered shadows within shadows, their yellow eyes glinting through the blowing snow. They circled the cabin slowly, like predators playing with their prey, patient and calculating. Evan could sense their intelligence, their cruel intent. These were not normal wolves driven by hunger or fear. They were something darker, something corrupted. "What do they want from you?" Evan whispered, his voice cracking. Arden didn't answer, of course, but in the deep look they shared, Evan saw something he hadn't seen before: guilt and sorrow. Arden knew these wolves. He had once been part of them. A memory flickered in Evan's mind, the villagers' old legends. Tales of a silver wolf, born under a blood moon, destined to either save or doom the wilderness. A creature marked by both great power and great danger. They had whispered that wherever the silver wolf roamed, darkness would follow, seeking to reclaim what was once theirs. And now the darkness had found them. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Evan leapt back, his heart hammering against his ribs. Another thud came, harder this time, followed by low growls rumbling from the other side. The wolves were testing the cabin's strength, and it wouldn't hold forever. Arden staggered forward, placing himself between Evan and the door. His body, though battered and bleeding, radiated defiance. He let out a deep, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very walls of the cabin. Evan rushed to grab a rusted iron poker from near the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was something. He had no illusions about his chances in a fight against the beasts outside, but he would not let Arden stand alone. Another crash against the door, this time splintering the wood slightly. "We have to go," Evan said, voice urgent. "We can't stay here." Arden gave a low, understanding bark. With a final glance toward the broken window at the back of the cabin, Evan knew their only chance was to slip out the back and flee into the forest. If they could stay ahead of the pack until daylight, maybe, just maybe, they could survive. Moving quickly, Evan pushed open the window, letting in a blast of icy air. Arden leapt through first, his body agile despite the pain. Evan followed, landing heavily in the snow, his breath stolen by the cold. The dark wolves noticed almost instantly. Howls tore through the night air, sending chills down Evan's spine. It wasn't just a call to hunt, it was a call to destroy. "Run!" Evan gasped, and together, man and wolf plunged into the frozen woods. The trees loomed around them, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. Snow crunched underfoot, and the heavy breathing of their pursuers grew closer with every heartbeat. Arden led the way, favoring his injured side but moving with surprising speed. Evan struggled to keep up, adrenaline the only thing keeping him on his feet. Behind them, shadows darted through the trees, yellow eyes flashing like will-o'-the-wisps. They moved silently, save for the occasional snarl that sliced through the night air. Evan risked a glance over his shoulder and nearly stumbled in terror. One of the dark wolves had closed the distance, a hulking figure with ragged black fur and teeth bared in a snarl. He barely had time to lift the iron poker before the creature lunged. The world slowed to a heartbeat. Evan swung wildly, the poker connecting with a sickening crack against the beast's muzzle. The wolf yelped, staggering back, but another was already taking its place. Arden turned back with a ferocious snarl, hurling himself at the advancing shadow. Despite his wounds, he fought like a creature possessed, his jaws snapping and teeth sinking into the dark wolf's shoulder. Evan fought to stay on his feet, jabbing and swinging the poker as best he could. But he knew they couldn't keep this up. There were too many. The wolves didn't tire, they didn't bleed. They were relentless. "Arden!" Evan shouted. "We have to move." The silver wolf broke free from the skirmish, blood staining his fur, and barked urgently. Evan didn't hesitate. Together, they turned and sprinted deeper into the forest. The trees thickened, the path narrowing. Moonlight barely penetrated the heavy clouds, casting the world in near-complete darkness. Evan's lungs burned with the cold, and his legs screamed in protest. Still, he pushed onward, refusing to look back. Suddenly, Arden veered sharply to the right, leading Evan toward a narrow crevice between two massive boulders. Without slowing, the wolf slipped through the gap, and Evan squeezed in after him, scraping his shoulders against the rough stone. On the other side, they found themselves in a hidden ravine, sheltered from the open forest. The howls behind them faded slightly, as if the dark wolves had lost their trail for now. Gasping for air, Evan leaned against a rock, trying to gather his scattered thoughts. Arden collapsed beside him, his chest heaving. "We can't outrun them forever," Evan panted. "We need a real plan." The wolf lifted his head, eyes gleaming even in the faint light. There was a determination there, a silent vow. Arden wasn't running anymore, he was preparing for a final stand. And somehow, Evan knew, they were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for Arden's very soul and for the future of whatever ancient magic still lingered in the world. The gathering darkness would not stop until it claimed them both. Unless they found a way to stop it first. The hidden ravine offered Evan and Arden a moment's breath, but that was all. Above them, the sky boiled with storm clouds, heavy and black. Snow drifted down in slow, lazy spirals, as if time itself were hesitating, holding its breath for what was to come. Arden's silver coat, once gleaming, was matted with blood and dirt. Yet, even weakened, the wolf stood proud, head high, ears pricked. Evan knelt beside him, feeling the cold seeping into his bones, not from the snow, but from the fear gnawing at his heart. He could hear the whispers in the wind, the low, guttural growls of the dark wolves. They were near, closing in, their hunger not just for flesh, but for Arden's very spirit. "We have to find a place to stand," Evan whispered, his breath a cloud of mist. Arden lifted his muzzle, sniffing the air. Without hesitation, he limped forward, leading Evan through the jagged rocks of the ravine. The boy followed, adrenaline driving his tired legs, every heartbeat drumming a warning, "Hurry, hurry." They emerged into a hidden clearing. At its center stood a tree unlike any Evan had ever seen, vast and ancient, its bark a shimmer of silver and blue, its roots knotted like the hands of an old god. The tree glowed faintly, as if cradling a piece of the moonlight within its heart. Beneath it, the snow was thin, revealing the frozen soil, sacred ground. Arden approached the tree reverently, brushing his nose against its bark. A soft hum, almost like a sigh, rippled through the air. This was a place of power, the last stronghold of purity in a forest being consumed by darkness. Evan felt it in his chest, the warmth of something old and good, pushing back against the corruption clawing at the edges of the world. And then he heard them. First, a low growl, then many. The dark wolves. They spilled into the clearing like a black tide, fanning out in a semicircle, trapping Evan and Arden between themselves and the sacred tree. Their eyes glowed yellow, their forms flickering with unnatural shadows. The snow under their paws melted, as if the earth itself recoiled from their touch. At the head of the pack stood a monstrous figure, a wolf nearly the size of a bear, his black fur streaked with scars, his eyes burning like twin coals. His presence twisted the air itself, making it harder to breathe. Evan's heart hammered against his ribs. He tightened his grip on the iron poker he had carried all this way, a pathetic weapon against such horror, but it was all he had. The leader spoke, not aloud, but inside Evan's mind a voice like a blade dragged across stone, "Return, Arden. You were ours once. You will be ours again." Arden responded with a deep, defiant snarl, stepping in front of Evan, protecting him even now. The leader's lip curled into something almost resembling a smile. "Then you will die with the human you love." The dark wolves lunged. The world exploded into chaos. Arden launched himself into the pack, a silver flash against the sea of darkness. Despite his injuries, he fought with a ferocity born of something deeper than rage, a sacred fury, a final stand. Evan moved too, instinct screaming louder than fear. He jabbed and swung the poker, knocking back smaller wolves that tried to flank them. His arms ached, his lungs burned, but he did not give up. They fought not for victory but for survival, for hope, for each other. The dark wolves pressed harder, sensing Arden's weariness. Their teeth flashed, their claws tore through the air. The leader watched from the shadows, waiting, patient. Evan barely saw the attack coming, a wolf barreling straight for him. He raised the poker too late. The creature slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Evan's head cracked against the frozen earth, stars bursting across his vision. Through the haze, he saw Arden saw the desperate panic in the wolf's golden eyes. And then, miraculously, the ancient tree pulsed. A blast of light, soft but fierce, rippled outward. The dark wolf atop Evan yelped and recoiled, its shadowy form seared by the light. Arden sprang, dragging Evan to his feet, shielding him once again. The leader snarled, stepping forward. The light stung his blackened hide, but it did not drive him back. He wanted the tree, its magic, its power. He wanted to end Arden's legacy forever. Arden growled low, and Evan, through the roaring in his ears, understood the tree could help them if they could protect it. Another wave of wolves attacked. Fighting side by side, Arden and Evan drove them back inch by bloody inch. Every second felt like an eternity, every movement a desperate prayer. Evan's arms shook, his body screamed for rest, but he refused. He would not leave Arden. Not now, not ever. At last, only the leader remained. He stalked forward, each step deliberate, cruel. His eyes gleamed with triumph. Arden braced himself, sides heaving, blood matting his fur. Evan knew Arden couldn't take another fight. He did the only thing he could. He stepped between the silver wolf and the black monster. The leader laughed a horrible, soul-sickening sound. "You would die for him," the voice rasped inside Evan's skull. "I would," Evan said, his voice raw but steady. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. Then, from the ancient tree, a blinding light erupted, not a gentle pulse this time, but a torrent. It poured into Evan and Arden, filling them with a fierce, burning energy that was not their own. Evan cried out as he felt it surge through him, burning away fear, stitching his broken strength back together. Arden rose, straighter, taller, gleaming like the true guardian he was born to be. The leader recoiled, snarling. Together, man and wolf took a single step forward. The final battle had begun. The clearing trembled under the weight of ancient forces awakening. The leader of the dark wolves, massive, scarred, and dripping malice, bared his teeth and lunged. But Arden was no longer the wounded creature who had stumbled through the snow. Bathed in the tree's silver light, the silver wolf had become something more, something eternal. He met the leader head-on, their bodies colliding with a sound like thunder. Snow exploded into the air. Teeth snapped, claws raked, and the air filled with snarls so raw they seemed to tear at the very fabric of the world. Evan stood back, shielding his eyes from the brightness. He could barely breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. But he stayed. For Arden. For the light. The two wolves tore into each other with savage grace. Arden, renewed by the tree's gift, moved like liquid silver, every step purposeful, every strike fueled by centuries of forgotten power. The dark leader fought with brute strength, his corrupted body monstrous and fast, but clumsy compared to Arden's fierce precision. Around them, the remaining dark wolves howled and circled, but none dared enter the battle. They knew this was a fight of champions, a battle that would decide everything. Evan watched, helpless, as Arden and the leader crashed against each other again and again. Blood painted the snow in streaks of red and black. The leader managed a brutal swipe, sending Arden skidding across the ground. Evan gasped, stepping forward, but Arden rose again, slower now, but with his head still high, his golden eyes burning. The leader laughed, a sound that curdled the blood. "You are alone, brother," he hissed into the cold. "Alone as you always were." Arden said nothing, but Evan did. From the edge of the clearing, he shouted, "He's not alone." The dark leader turned his burning gaze toward Evan, and Arden struck. With a savage roar, Arden launched himself upward, jaws clamping around the leader's throat. The two crashed to the ground, rolling, snarling, tearing. Evan ran to the ancient tree. His hands brushed the bark, it felt alive beneath his touch, thrumming with power. He could feel it offering something, strength, if only he could take it. Desperation lent him courage. He plunged his hand against the tree's heart. For a moment, there was only searing light, memories, emotions, ancient battles lost to time. He saw Arden as a pup, saw him trained by elder wolves, saw him betrayed, saw the long, lonely years he had survived, refusing to give up hope. And he saw what he must do. The tree wasn't just a refuge. It was a weapon if Evan could awaken it. He focused all his will, all his heart, into a single thought: protect. The ground shuddered. The clearing exploded in light. The dark wolves howled in agony, retreating, their forms unraveling into mist. The leader screamed as the light burned him, forcing him back from Arden. Blinded, Evan stumbled forward. He saw Arden, bloody but standing tall, advanced toward the leader. This was it. No more running. No more fear. The silver wolf's final stand. Arden moved with the grace of a blade, striking fast, slashing through the corruption clinging to the dark leader. The great black wolf staggered, weakened now by the light and Arden's fury. With a final, earth-shaking leap, Arden bore the leader down, teeth finding their mark. The dark wolf gave one last, chilling howl, a sound of rage, of sorrow, of something lost long ago, and then crumbled into black mist that was torn apart by the silver winds rising from the sacred tree. Silence fell over the clearing. The remaining dark wolves fled, their forms scattering like smoke before a storm. It was over. Arden stood trembling in the aftermath, the light of the tree slowly fading back to a soft, steady glow. His silver coat gleamed once more under the battered moon. Evan approached carefully. "Arden," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. The great wolf turned to him, golden eyes soft now, tired but peaceful. And then, without warning, Arden collapsed. "No, no, no," Evan cried, rushing to his side. He cradled the great head in his lap, feeling the life ebbing from the brave creature. Arden's chest rose and fell shallowly. He had won, but at a terrible cost. Evan stroked Arden's head, blinking back tears. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved them. You saved me." The silver wolf's eyes fluttered open once more. He nuzzled Evan's hand gently, his breath a warm sigh. And then, with a final shuddering breath, Arden stilled. The forest held its breath. Above, the clouds parted, and a single shaft of pure moonlight fell upon the clearing, illuminating Arden's body and something more. A silver mist rose from the wolf's form, swirling upward into the light, as if his spirit were being carried home to a place beyond pain and sorrow. Evan watched, tears streaming freely now, but he felt no despair, only gratitude. The silver wolf was free. The first light of dawn spilled gently across the battered forest. The snow, once trampled and stained by the battle, now shimmered under a veil of silver and gold. The ancient tree stood tall at the heart of the clearing, its bark glowing softly, as if mourning and celebrating all at once. Evan sat in silence beside the place where Arden had fallen, his hand resting lightly on the ground that still held the wolf's warmth. Though the body was gone, the spirit of the silver wolf lingered in the air, in the earth, in the quiet beating of Evan's heart. He looked up at the sky. It was clear now, impossibly vast and full of promise. The darkness had broken. The forest was free. A gentle wind stirred the trees, and for a fleeting moment, Evan could almost hear Arden's voice in it, not words, but a feeling, strength, loyalty, love. "You're still here," Evan whispered, smiling through his tears. He rose slowly, every muscle aching, but his spirit buoyed by something stronger than pain. The forest around him seemed different now, awake, alive. Birds sang tentative songs. Small animals crept from their hiding places, blinking at the new world. The darkness was gone. But Evan knew the forest would need time to heal. Just like he would. He turned one last time to the ancient tree. As he watched, a single, delicate sprout pushed up through the frozen soil, at its roots a tiny, silver-leafed sapling, trembling but strong. A new beginning. Evan smiled and set off through the trees, guided by the rising sun. His steps were slow but sure. He would find his way back to the village. He would tell them everything about Arden, about the sacrifice, about the hope that had been born on this sacred ground. He would become the keeper of the silver wolf's story. And he would make sure it was never forgotten. 1 year later. The village had changed. Where once suspicion and fear ruled, now kindness and courage had taken root. The people remembered the terrible winter, the rumors of darkness. But they also remembered the boy who had ventured into the wild and returned with a tale of sacrifice and hope. Evan often found himself standing at the forest's edge, gazing into the trees, feeling the silver wolf's presence like a steady hand on his shoulder. Children would gather around him by the fireside at night, wide-eyed, as he spoke of Arden, the guardian who had once protected them all. He told the story not with sorrow, but with pride. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, he and the children would hear a distant howl carried through the woods, a sound pure and proud. Evan would smile and say, "He's still watching. He's still guarding." And they believed him, because they could feel it too. The bond between the silver wolf and the boy had not ended with death. It had become part of the very land itself, whispered in the leaves, sung in the rivers, hidden in the shimmering light of the stars. The legend of Arden the last, the greatest of the silver wolves, would live forever. Not just as a story, but as a promise. that even in the darkest times, there would always be those who stood for the light, and they would never stand alone. And so, the whispers of the Silver Wolf live on in the hearts of those who believe in loyalty, courage, and the unseen bonds that tie us together across worlds. We hope this journey touched your heart as much as it touched ours. If you have ever experienced a bond so deep with an animal, a place, or even a memory, we would love to hear your story. Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your words could inspire others too. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video. It truly helps us grow this community of dreamers and storytellers. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new adventure. There's so much more magic waiting for you here. Until next time, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep listening to the whispers of the world around you. See you soon.